In the humid darkness of a limestone cave beneath the hills of southern Okinawa, 78-year-old Takamatsu Gushiken crouches low, his headlamp cutting through the gloom as he carefully brushes soil away with a small hand tool. Takamatsu Gushiken turns on a headlamp and enters a cave buried in Okinawa's jungle. He gently runs his fingers through the gravel until two pieces of bone emerge. "These are from the skulls," he says, "of an infant and possibly an adult." He carefully places them in a ceramic rice bowl and takes a moment to imagine people dying 80 years ago as they hid in this cave during one of the fiercest battles of World War II. What Gushiken and countless other volunteers have discovered over the decades in the labyrinthine tunnel systems beneath Okinawa represents one of the most shocking and extensive archaeological discoveries from World War II. A hidden world that reveals the true horror of what was arguably the Pacific War's most devastating battle. The caves beneath Okinawa were not merely shelters from the storm of war. They were entire underground cities, hospitals, command centers, and ultimately, mass graves that would claim more lives than any other single battle in the Pacific theater. On April 1, 1945, U.S. troops landed on Okinawa during their push toward mainland Japan, beginning a battle that lasted until late June and killed about 12,000 Americans and more than 188,000 Japanese, half of them Okinawan civilians. What these brave volunteers continue to uncover in the dark recesses of these caves challenges everything we thought we knew about the Battle of Okinawa and exposes a tragedy so profound that its implications continue to shock historians and archaeologists to this day. The tunnel systems that honeycomb the bedrock beneath Okinawa were both natural formations carved by millennia of water erosion and elaborate man-made fortifications, hastily constructed in the final desperate months before the American invasion. During World War II, Japanese naval forces in Okinawa, led by Rear Admiral Minoru Ota, built an elaborate underground headquarters with hundreds of meters of connecting tunnels under a hill in Tomagusuku. In preparation for the Battle of Okinawa, Japan constructed a tunnel complex to serve as the headquarters of its naval forces on the island in 1944. But the naval headquarters was merely the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the surface of this tropical paradise lay a hidden world that would become both sanctuary and sepulcher for hundreds of thousands of human beings. The scale of the underground construction undertaken by Japanese forces was staggering in its ambition and tragic in its ultimate futility. The tunnels weren't dug until 1944, and the Japanese used its own troops and Korean laborers to dig them. Records suggest that the majority of the complex was up and running within a few months. More than 125 stairs were built into the complex, so that commanders could get in and out of the underground facility. The top commander's room was cemented and had mats as carpet, as well as a door. He was even provided with a fully flushing toilet. Ventilation was crucial to the underground complex, as well as storage rooms for food and supplies, and cable for communications. What makes these discoveries so shocking is not merely their scale, but what they reveal about the human cost of Japan's desperate last stand. Designed as a series of semicircular tunnels 450 meters, 1,475 feet, in length that could sustain 4,000 people, the headquarters was dug out with shovels and picks by soldiers and civilians, nearly all by then living on starvation rations. These were not the work of construction crews with modern equipment, but the product of human hands clawing desperately at limestone and coral in a race against time, knowing that American forces were steadily approaching across the Pacific. The most shocking discovery has been the sheer diversity of what these tunnels contained. Far from being simple military bunkers, they represented entire underground civilizations attempting to survive the apocalypse raging above. Some fortifications had multiple underground levels and tunnels connecting them to nearby positions, allowing for Japanese troops to move about to offer reinforcements or additional fire to weakened areas. The bunkers and pillboxes were hidden in caves or carved-out tunnels to protect them from naval bombardment. But what archaeologists have found goes far beyond military installations. Perhaps the most heartbreaking discoveries have been the underground hospitals, where teenage girls were pressed into service as nurses in conditions that defy human imagination. During the first half of the Battle of Okinawa, as the Okinawa Army Hospital buried in the hills of Hibaru became overwhelmed with patients and was under the constant threat of attack, a limestone cave was quietly being prepared to support it. For about 3 months, beginning in February 1945, military units had moved in and out of the Abuchiragama in Itokazu, a village just a few kilometers from Hibaru. When they vacated, and the first doctor, nurses, and 14 Himeuri Gakutotai, Himeuri Student Corps, high school student nurses arrived May 1st, it had been thoroughly abandoned, and they would have to fabricate beds and make do without supplies or support from headquarters as they set up the clinic cave. The conditions in these underground hospitals were horrific beyond description. Candlelight for illumination would have to suffice, like at Hibaru, though this cave once had working electric lights run on a power generator at a nearby sugar mill, but the generator had ceased to function. Young women, some barely out of childhood, found themselves performing amputations and treating horrific wounds by candlelight in caves that reeked of death and human waste. Based in a cave network, they worked in wretched conditions, living in miserable and dirty wards, experiencing the horrifying reality of wounded and dying soldiers. The artifacts discovered in these hospital caves reveal the desperate improvisation that characterized the final months of the battle. Sure enough, in that very spot, searchers start finding old World War II-era medicine bottles buried in the dirt. They unearth Japanese Army uniform buttons, part of a boot, and even ampules. Hermetically sealed, small, rounded glass containers that still held medicine inside, most likely morphine. In his previous digs here, Kuniyoshi unearthed dozens of beer bottles, morphine vials, syringes, dental kits. He left a pile of more ominous relics near a wall. There is a small display of medical supplies and a microscope, unearthed by the entrance, the better to come back later and get them, and some Korean graffiti, but all of the wooden bunks and anything else useful is long gone. Even more shocking than the medical supplies are the personal artifacts that reveal the human stories behind the statistics. The museum has an exhibit of documents from the former Japanese Navy, as well as small arms, military uniforms, and similar articles and letters from soldiers to their families that were discovered within the caves. These intimate items, letters never sent, personal photographs, religious talismans, paint a picture of ordinary human beings caught in extraordinary circumstances, facing death in the darkness beneath the earth. The most disturbing discovery, however, has been the evidence of the systematic killing of patients who could not be evacuated as American forces closed in. Luckily, there was no one else alive in the cave, as you learn that Japanese patients who could not be evacuated were poisoned by their doctors with potassium cyanide with milk. Hippocratic oath, indeed. This horrific revelation challenges our understanding of medical ethics during wartime and reveals the desperate measures taken when the code of Bushido collided with the realities of impending defeat. The caves also served as massive civilian shelters, and what has been found there tells an even more tragic story. Many civilians hid in caves to avoid being killed by the bombardments or captured by the enemy. The civilian toll in Okinawa was even higher. with an estimated 100,000 people killed, around a quarter of the pre-war population of the islands. The Japanese government told local inhabitants that they would be beaten and murdered by U.S. forces. Many hid in the island's caves. Some committed suicide as the fighting approached. The evidence of these mass civilian deaths continues to shock those who discover it. Over the past 4 decades, the sturdy Okinawan, an exterminator by trade, has single-handedly dug out 2,200 sets of remains from some 500 tunnels and fortifications hidden in the jungles of this beautiful island. "This cave is full of them," he says, examining one of the skulls in his hand. "I've found 35 sets here already." The scale of death discovered in these caves defies comprehension. Entire families who chose death over surrender, believing the propaganda that Americans would torture and kill them if captured. What makes these discoveries particularly shocking is the evidence they provide of the systematic nature of civilian deaths. The inhabitants were not allowed to surrender. If you surrendered to the Americans and tried to walk out with your hands up, the Japanese would shoot you in the back, Takamatsu tells VOA. This revelation exposes the true horror of Japan's defense of Okinawa. It was not just a military last stand, but a deliberate policy of civilian extermination disguised as patriotic sacrifice. The tunnel systems also reveal shocking evidence of the use of child soldiers and civilian conscripts. On March 23, 1945, these students and teachers were inducted into units of the Okinawa Army Field Hospital, serving the Japanese Imperial Army. Based in a cave network, they worked in wretched conditions, living in miserable and dirty wards, experiencing the horrifying reality of wounded and dying soldiers. Assigned to work as nurse assistants, they cared for the injured around the clock, braved bombardment and gunfire carrying water and food to patients and hospital staff, and burying the dead. The fate of these young conscripts was particularly tragic. In its 1989 dedication address, the Himayuri Alumni Foundation described the fate of the students once Japanese defense of Okinawa became untenable. Suddenly dismissed on June 18, 1945, the students had nowhere to go under the U.S. siege, some killed in the battle raging around them, while others killed themselves with shells or hand grenades. The discovery of children's remains alongside military equipment and medical supplies in these caves provides stark testimony to Japan's willingness to sacrifice its youngest citizens in pursuit of a hopeless cause. The command bunkers discovered beneath Okinawa reveal another shocking dimension of the battle: the complete disconnect between the leadership issuing orders and the reality facing those who had to execute them. At a nighttime command conference convened on May 21, 1945, Lieutenant General Mitsuru Ushijima, commander of the 120,000-man Japanese 32nd Army in Okinawa, decided that his troops would have to evacuate their underground headquarters deep beneath historic Shuri Castle and retreat further south. The ferocious Battle of Okinawa had been raging for 8 weeks, and Ushijima's well-dug-in Japanese fighters had made American forces pay dearly for every small gain thus far. But by late May, U.S. Army and Marines were closing in on the beautiful ancient capital of Shuri, where Ushijima had established what he had promised would be his final line of defense. The aftermath of this command decision reveals the shocking callousness of the Japanese military leadership toward civilian lives. On May 27th, under the cover of darkness and a tight blanket of secrecy, troops of the 32nd Army fled from Shuri, leaving non-combatant Okinawan civilians to fend for themselves, unprotected from naval, aerial, and artillery bombardment. More than 100,000 Okinawans, 1/4 of the population, perished in the fighting or committed suicide under orders from the Japanese military instead of surrendering. The physical evidence found in these command bunkers provides shocking testimony to the final moments of the Japanese leadership. The tunnel was dark and damp. Gray concrete walls lined the old bunker. Blotches of green were scattered on various walls, splattered marks where grenades had exploded. In the former Japanese Navy underground headquarters in Tomigosuku, shrapnel-scarred walls are evidence of a mass suicide. A memorial outside reads, "Vice Admiral Minoru Ota and his 4,000 men committed suicide in this underground headquarters on June 18, 1945. The most shocking aspect of these discoveries is what they reveal about the systematic nature of the killing that took place in these tunnels. The tunnels remained untouched for many years after the war, and it was finally opened to public in 1970 after it was renovated and the remains of about 2,400 people were collected. The most poignant feature of the headquarters is that the final commander of the Japanese naval forces, Rear Admiral Minoru Ota, and many of his officers and men committed seppuku there. It is said that 175 bodies were found, and a monument dedicated to them stands outside the venue. What makes these mass suicides particularly shocking is the evidence that they were often coercive rather than voluntary. The next cavern had been a hospital. Like so many others, its walls and ceiling are still charred black from the American flamethrowers unleashed on its trapped occupants. Unlike bullets, the flames could curl around corners and often reached into the darkest recesses of the shelters, killing all inside. The discovery of flame-scarred walls alongside evidence of deliberate killings reveals the horrific choice faced by Japanese forces: death by American flamethrowers or death by their own hand. Perhaps the most shocking discovery of all has been the extent to which these tunnels continued to claim lives long after the official end of the battle. Survivors held out and civilians moved in, living in the dark off the leftovers from the hospital and occasionally foraging at night. The cave was discovered by American forces June 6, and several attempts were made to forcibly evacuate the occupants with artillery, fire, and white phosphorus, but the cave dwellers refused to be smoked out. Most didn't leave until August 22 when Japanese soldiers informed them the war was over. 3 final holdouts were removed by the Americans a month later. The ongoing discovery of remains in these caves continues to shock and horrify those involved in the recovery efforts. Of the estimated 188,940 Japanese killed in the Battle of Okinawa, most of their remains had been collected and placed in the National Cemetery on the island, the Health Ministry says. Around 1,400 remains found in recent decades sit in storage. The process of identification has been painfully slow. The remains of some 1,400 people found on Okinawa sit in storage for possible identification with DNA testing. So far, just 6 have been identified and returned to their families. Volunteer bone hunters and families looking for their loved ones say the government should do more to help. The technology available to archaeologists and forensic specialists today has revealed shocking details about the final moments of those who died in these tunnels. It was only in 2003 that the Japanese government started DNA matching after requests from the families of the dead. But tests were limited to the remains found with teeth and man-made artifacts that could provide hints to their identities. In 2016, Japan enacted a law launching a remains recovery initiative to promote more DNA matching and cooperation with the U.S. Department of Defense. The results of this modern forensic analysis have provided shocking insights into the demographics of those who died, revealing that many were children, elderly civilians, and non-combatants who had no role in the military conflict, but were caught up in its deadly embrace. The international dimension of these discoveries adds another layer of shock to the story. Quinn, A reservist from the 29th Marine Regiment entered the cave, reportedly once the Japanese 62nd Division Field Hospital, with a group of Marines on June 29, 1945, according to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency website. Human remains that may belong to U.S. Marines were uncovered in a cave in Itomen, Okinawa, by Quentai USA on April 19, 2022. Eyewitnesses reported that the Marines turned left toward the main chamber, Akatsuka said. They were ambushed by Japanese holdouts somewhere inside, and Quinn was killed, the agency website states. What shocks researchers is the discovery that these caves often contain the remains of both American and Japanese servicemen buried together in the same locations. As Quentai worked to return bodies of Japanese soldiers who died in the Battle of Saipan, they came across an unexpected discovery: the unmistakable remains of U.S. service members buried in a mass grave alongside their enemy at the time, the Japanese. This discovery challenges traditional narratives about the nature of warfare and reveals that even in death, the distinctions between friend and enemy could become meaningless in the horror of these underground battles. The sophistication of some of these tunnel systems continues to shock military historians and engineers. Eventually, 1 meter below the cave floor, they hit ceramic tiles. Traditional red Okinawan Alagawara roof tiles repurposed as flooring, hidden from sight for nearly 8 decades. The discovery of professionally tiled floors, ventilation systems, and other infrastructure reveals that these were not hastily constructed shelters, but carefully planned underground cities designed for long-term occupation. Wards were split between different chambers, and a surgeon's office and treatment area were arranged under one of the few air holes in the upper end of one of the larger chambers. There were also marked restrooms, a cooking area, rest areas, and a morgue. The environmental evidence found in these caves provides shocking testimony to the conditions endured by their occupants. Living inside the Miyazuko bunker was far from comfortable. The environment was dark, cramped, and stressful. The constant worry of enemy invasion, combined with poor lighting and limited oxygen, made life extremely challenging. Soldiers often lived for weeks underground with no sunlight, leading to both physical exhaustion and psychological strain. The thick air and echoing tunnels created an atmosphere of isolation that few could endure for long periods. Even with its strong structural features, the bunker was not a place of peace. It was a last line of defense. The discovery of improvised weapons and explosive devices continues to shock those exploring these caves decades later. "Here," he says, holding out a squishy brown stick about 6 inches long. "It's dynamite. There's a whole crate of them right here." And that's not all they find. Bullets, grenades, and the leavings of other military artifacts, ravaged by exposure, yet still partially recognizable in their decrepit state, begin to pile up. The presence of unexploded ordnance continues to make exploration of these caves dangerous. With outside an unmarked cave near the Seifa Utaki sacred site in Nanjo, an unexploded grenade rests near the entrance, just off a busy road. Inside, pickaxe scars from the cave's construction are still smooth as it opens to a dugout machine gun emplacement. Perhaps most shocking of all is the revelation of crimes committed against civilians in these caves by both Japanese forces and, in some cases, American troops. Residents of Katsuyama reportedly killed the 3 Marines for their repeated rape of village women during the occupation of Okinawa and hid their bodies in a nearby cave out of fear for retaliation. The Katsuyama incident was kept secret until August 16, 1997, when the bodies and identities of the Marines were discovered. These discoveries challenge comfortable narratives about the good war and reveal the complex moral landscape that characterized the final stages of the Pacific conflict. The scale of the tunnel systems continues to amaze researchers as new sections are discovered and mapped. The network is around 30 meters underground and is around 2 kilometers long. But this figure represents only what has been officially documented. Local residents and researchers believe the actual extent of the tunnel networks may be several times larger, with many sections still unexplored or deliberately sealed after the war. The full extent of the tunnel complex is not open to visitors because parts of it are still being excavated. The ongoing nature of these discoveries means that our understanding of the Battle of Okinawa continues to evolve as new evidence emerges from the darkness. Quentai and April first excavated the area where Quinn and Hartman fell. The group attracted 100 volunteers, including U.S. service members from nearby bases and members of the Japan Self-Defense Force, Akatsuka said. They recovered 10 bags of wartime artifacts and 2 bags of human remains, including large leg bones that may have belonged to the 2 Marines. Each excavation reveals new artifacts, new remains, and new evidence of the human tragedy that unfolded in these underground chambers. What makes these discoveries particularly shocking in the modern context is their relevance to contemporary geopolitical tensions. Meanwhile, as regional tensions escalate with China over Taiwan and with North Korea over its missile and nuclear weapons programs, there are growing fears that these heavily militarized islands could once again be caught in the crosshairs of a Pacific war. Missiles will fly to Okinawa again. If there is a war, this place will be attacked. That's what bothers me the most, Takamatsu tells VOA. The bone diggers working in these caves today are not just recovering the past. They are warning about a possible future. The preservation efforts surrounding these caves reveal shocking bureaucratic indifference to historical preservation. However, some of the earth used in the construction of the Hinoko base is being excavated from the south of Okinawa, from battlegrounds where U.S. forces came ashore in 1945. Local authorities insist the material is screened before it is dug up. Takamatsu says it likely contains the remains of Japanese and American soldiers. This is blasphemy against the dead. I'm imploring them to stop doing it, he says. The fact that human remains are potentially being used as construction material for military bases adds a horrific contemporary dimension to these wartime discoveries. The psychological impact on those who spend their lives exploring these caves provides shocking testimony to the lasting trauma of war. The best way to honor the war dead is never to allow another war, Gushikin says. I'm worried about Okinawa's situation now. I'm afraid there is a growing risk that Okinawa may become a battlefield again. The volunteers who dedicate their lives to recovering remains from these tunnels carry with them not just the physical evidence of past horrors, but the psychological burden of understanding what war truly means for ordinary people caught in its path. The artifacts discovered in personal possessions continue to provide shocking insights into the human dimension of the tragedy. Beyond the military equipment and medical supplies, archaeologists have found children's toys, school textbooks, family photographs, and personal letters that reveal the complete breakdown of the boundary between civilian and military targets. These intimate objects, preserved in the darkness for 8 decades, provide testimony to lives cut short and families destroyed in the underground hell of Okinawa's cave systems. The engineering challenges faced by those constructing these tunnels under wartime conditions continue to shock modern experts. To avoid enemy detection, the Miyazuko bunker was built entirely underground, covered by dense forest and terrain that blended seamlessly with the natural environment. Construction was carried out using hand tools and minimal machinery to avoid drawing attention. Most of the labor happened at night, with strict silence protocols. Workers carved rock manually and reinforced the tunnels with steel bars and concrete. Above ground, planted vegetation further masked the entrance, making it nearly impossible for enemy scouts or aerial photographers to identify the site. The discoveries made in these tunnels challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of the Pacific War and the extent of civilian involvement in military operations. The battle for Okinawa was about as close to hell on Earth as one could imagine. Outgunned and outnumbered, the island's defenders chose to fight a battle of attrition, enduring pounding artillery and bombing in their underground shelters and emerging only briefly, often at night, to attack. In 3 months, beginning on April 1, 1945, Easter Sunday, some 14,000 Americans and 80,000 or more Japanese soldiers died. As many as 150,000 Okinawans, a third of the civilian population, died with them. The final accounting of what lies beneath Okinawa may never be complete. For those who live in modern Okinawa, most would be forgiven for not knowing there's a cave that holds so much World War II history in the area. After all, the past is a reality that's woven into the fabric of the small Japanese island. You can't turn a corner without running into the ghosts of war. There are caves everywhere, so it would come as no surprise that one had yet to give up all of its secrets. Most have not. What continues to shock those who study these discoveries is the realization that the Battle of Okinawa was not simply a military engagement, but a preview of what an invasion of the Japanese mainland might have looked like. The tunnel systems, the civilian involvement, the mass suicides, and the complete breakdown of traditional rules of warfare all pointed toward a form of total war that would have made the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki pale in comparison to the casualties that might have resulted from Operation Downfall, the planned invasion of Japan. The legacy of these shocking discoveries continues to influence contemporary politics and military planning. The caves beneath Okinawa serve as both tomb and warning, a reminder of the human cost of war and a challenge to those who would too easily consider military solutions to political problems. Let's all stand together. Let's eliminate war from the earth. I believe that if we ordinary citizens join hands, we can do it. The tunnels beneath Okinawa continue to yield their secrets grudgingly, each discovery adding new layers to our understanding of one of history's most terrible battles. As volunteers like Takamatsu Gushiken continue their grim work in the darkness below, they carry with them the hopes of families seeking closure and the responsibility of ensuring that the world never forgets what they found in the tunnels beneath Okinawa. The bones, the artifacts, the evidence of unimaginable suffering, all of it serves as testimony to the human capacity for both horror and heroism, and as a warning to future generations about the true cost of war. In the end, what shocks us most about the discoveries in Okinawa's tunnels is not the scale of death or the sophistication of the fortifications, but the revelation that ordinary people, children, grandparents, students, teachers, shopkeepers, were transformed by war into casualties in an underground hell that defies our ability to comprehend. Their remains, carefully recovered by volunteers who understand the weight of their responsibility, serve as silent witnesses to a chapter in human history that we ignore at our peril. The tunnels beneath Okinawa have not yet yielded all their secrets, and perhaps they never will. But what they have already revealed about the nature of war, the cost of extremism, and the resilience of human compassion in the face of unimaginable horror will continue to shock and educate future generations for years to come.